Get started. This is a kind of rough overview of where I hope to go today as well. And so first of all, looking at recording, both of us actually have visited India in the past year as well, and sort of attempted our own sort of visual anthropology records as well as part of that. And I've kind of separated archiving and presenting. They're obviously very overlapped, but just to kind of separate them here, think about them separately and how they sort of combine as a result. And then finally, how all of that leads into what it means to do undergraduate research as an anthropologist as well. So yeah, first of all, I am from Norwich. I've travelled down from this weekend, and it's a bit of background from where I'm from. I'm actually in an art history department, so I study here in the School of Modern Art Museology, which is right in the middle of an art gallery. And so this has obviously influenced a lot of the sort of approach to anthropology. I study art history, anthropology and archaeology as a combined degree. And so basically kind of boils down to the fact that we do a lot of object analysis. Sort of down here I've got some examples of the sort of themes that sort of come up. So sort of really using visual records and looking at object biographies and things like that as well. So really I'm coming from a very much a material approach. So thinking about interdisciplinariness, we've had so much interdisciplinary approaches to anthropology this weekend, so I'm just trying to state where I'm coming from, so hopefully you can follow me as well, and maybe disagree with me or whatever afterwards as well. But yeah, so back to the plan. So first of all, just to introduce Lydia's sort of work. She has been working with an archive of Bulu Imams, and he's basically been photographically recording the wall paintings done by women in this area of India. And this sort of archive dates back, I think, a few decades now. You have to check the sort of details of Lydia, I'm afraid. But it's a combination, thinking about materiality as well as part of this. It's a combination of both photographic film but also more recently digital archives as well. And so Lydia's been helping him sort through that. She's also doing a dissertation research topic on that to sort of see how we can use somebody else's archive and sort of use it to gain, anthropological knowledge, as it were, from that. And how do we do that is one of the questions we're looking at. But also, Lydia was taking her own photographs as well. It's kind of interesting, it raises issues of, if you're going to archive these things, it really is a creative process. So you're really selecting what you put in and what you leave out. And so sort of trying to think of those things, but also thinking about accessibility as well. Obviously Lydia's photographs are digital as well, and they're being transmitted to you digitally here, and even Bulu's film ones have been transferred to digital as well. So just sort of thinking about the materiality of itself and how that affects our interaction with the archives, as it were, as well. So that's very, very brief. It's a shame Lydia's not here, because her talk will probably be more interesting than mine. So, but having a look, I'm seeing the sort of archive that I'm working with in the context of presenting. I'm actually working with somebody else's, but in a version of a film. So I'm actually really looking at one film in particular, which is Robert Gardner's Forest of Bliss. It would be helpful for me if there was a little wave or nod if people have seen this film or not. Okay, well, it is one of the classics. It was first screened in 1985. It's got 86 here, but 85, 86, sort of 86 was sort of released a bit more widespread than that as well. But it's a very controversial anthropological film. He doesn't strictly call himself an anthropologist as well. He's a filmmaker at Harvard. Basically, he went to Varanasi or Benares as it was then, on the river India, holy city, where sort of traditionally you can go to be cremated, as part of the Hindu religions as well. But I'm talking now, sorry. But basically, he collated a lot of visual imagery, but also oral sounds as well. And he basically collected all these different motifs. And he constructs and weaves them together into this grand narrative of a 24-hour cycle, but condensed into 90 minutes. And there's no narration or subtitles or any sort of, there's no talking heads. It's basically really sort of observational cinema, as it were, but still very constructed, very highly criticised for being too arty, for being not being representative enough of the people, and sort of controls representation. Also, you don't see Gardner himself in the film, He's always behind the camera, and for me, that does all kinds of interesting things with your position watching the film as well. But also others see it as the God trick. He's sort of imposing his view on the world and telling us that's how it is. But yeah, it's very, very contested. But I still think as much as this could be a film about about Robert Gardner himself, it's still also a film about Varanasi, because it's all the footages of that. And so thinking about how those dialects work, that sort of work together as well, is what I find really interesting. But also, this is his website, so you can see it still on. And this also, thinking about archives, could be considered an archive as well. And so thinking about Sarah Kinks, you might have read if you've studied visual anthropology. I'm aware I may be talking to people that are more educated about this than me, so I'm a bit hesitant about using some phrases. But hypermedia is this idea of putting basically CD-ROMs, using websites, using blogs, stuff. And we've already seen quite a lot of visual ethnography this weekend, whether it's been photographs or short films, as we saw a lot of films yesterday. And it's basically thinking about how that works together with text. How do you make the associations? In Robert Gardner's film, it's a full 90 minutes that it's constructed in a day, and those associations are crucial to understanding the meaning. Whereas hypermedia, it's more interactive. You might click on something else. Like the YouTube, examples we saw yesterday as well, where basically, he could click and choose them to sort of demonstrate the sort of examples of what you want to say. And so the materiality is really key to this as well. So the two, if we're doing visual ethnography today, we really want to think of digital lends itself much more to this. But have we lost something by not using the old, sort of methods of literally cutting and sticking a film together? So for Gardner's Bliss, and one of the ways that I'm sort of researching at the moment is actually treating it as an artifact in itself through this material approach. I don't know if anybody has read Elliot Weinberger's The Camera People, an essay that he wrote in '92. He basically describes a tribe known as the ethnographic filmmaker, and they believe they are invisible, and they worship a terrifying deity known as reality, whose eternal enemy is evil twin art. Basically, Gardner's Bliss is great for that, because it is bringing that question of creation in something that is ethnographic, or could be ethnographic, right to the forefront there. And so sort of analysing it as an artifact. But also in this process, sort of seeing, how to be a filmmaker, as it were, by looking at its processes of making, or maybe how not to be a filmmaker, but sort of really trying to think of those kind of things with that. And so yeah, I think, hopefully I've explained the film for you. I really would, recommend you can watch little clips on his website and stuff as well, to sort of see it. But one of the things that I wanted to do after watching this film was, it's very hypnotic, it's very mesmerising, because of the repetitions that he uses, both orally, bells sounding, dogs barking, and at times it's disturbing as well. It gets to these points where, it's very sensory as an experience to watch it. And so that really made me want to actually go and visit the place myself to see, is it really like that? I felt really stood sort of looking at the film without actually doing this. And so I did, and I took also his film originally was 35mm film, I should say that, and that kind of lens, that the materiality of that lends a kind of, you can see the frames as they move, even in the digital version, and a lot of the scenes are very slow-moving boats with mist and stuff, and it really heightens that sensory sort of experience that you're watching this film, but also that it's something a bit surreal, something that's not quite reality as well at the same time. So I went there basically to see how much of this was constructed, how much of it was romanticised. Of course, James Inden talks about the huge problem with thinking about India as the culture because of the Western tendency to romanticise and mysticize, and irrationalise the sort of societies there and that as well. So I've got all these things in my head. But basically I went, and then this is kind of my retelling, just before you now, of Gardner's film through just a few of my photographs. That's kind of interesting itself, thinking about the retelling of myths and everything this morning as well. I don't know if this is ethnography. I went there, I was taking photos of another place that I'd never been to before and attempt to record it, talking to people obviously as well. But I was very much trying to figure out what Gardner was doing as well, and a lot of my shots are Gardner-esque as a result of that. I don't know if I'm happy with that or not. There's all these kind of questions from it. Basically, it is. If you've seen the film, the opening shots, the mist in the mornings, it's first thing in the morning in Varanasi, on the river, and the city's on one side and there's sort of a wasteland on the other. Gardner makes all kinds of links between the two of, travelling from life to death and all that kind of stuff, which, could be imposed or could be actual. And the sunrise is really important because the sun rises from one side of the river and sets behind the city, and that has all kinds of implications in the daily cycle as well of life there as well. And birds, Gardner's done a previous film called Dead Birds. He seems to like to appreciate birds of death. There's lots of birds in this film. But also dogs is another one of his motifs, and dogs, ethically considering how to film, it's much easier to take a photo of a dog than it is to take a photo of a person, and yet, also thinking of this, very much, I've been reading David McDougall's The Corporeal Image as well, so really looking at bodies in the film and different kinds of bodies, and that as well, and dogs were ones that were much easier. For me, I didn't have a problem with taking photos of dogs, but people it's more difficult. But kites as well. Now this is some really interesting, personal experience that there were kites all the way through the film, mainly because they float higher above the burning gaps actually, which is kind of interesting itself. But it was only actually when I went there that I realised the significance of it, because there is a kite festival in the middle of January, and that was the same time that Gardner was filming as well. But that sort of thing isn't explicit in the film, and that's something that I haven't been reading about in all the reviews. It's been very endlessly reviewed as well, so sometimes I wonder why I'm doing this. Am I just adding to the noise, as it were? But the boatman as well, really significant, and just a lot of the in-between shots are just the sound of the oar hitting the water, basically. It's a very beautiful, sort of, emotive record of when I was there, I felt it, and it was hard then to think, oh my, goodness, have I been romanticised, have I romanticised this place before coming here, and all these kind of questions. I'm probably asking too many questions. But also the steps as well, another motif. And crucially where they meet the water, and thinking about liminal spaces as well, with the travel of water being constant, and steps sort of being neither above or below, but above leading to the city, and the fact that the cremations happen on the steps that the Manakana begat, sort of is, I find real significance in that as well, the liminality of it all, and that as well. And then also the problems of the film does contain scenes of cremation sort of accumulating too in the last sort of section. And Gardner himself describes how he starts off by forming a boat further along the river that kind of has Manakana in the background, so that he's not imposing. It's how do you approach something that's so sacred in order to record it on film and make it a representation. And here this is the boat next to the gap, but this is all the wood that is used for the funeral pyre. But they don't like you to take photos, and I completely respect that. And I didn't want to take any photos, but then it's like, how do you how could Gardner have not taken photos, or could he, how do you represent the unrepresentable, in some ways, visually as well, or should you just not do that? And these are all the sorts of questions that I'm sort of thinking about as well. And also, one of the reasons it was quite easy to take photographs at the time is because there's so many tourists from all over the world, come either to sort of delight in the spectacle. This is the evening of Puja, which is happening on the river banks, but also for religious devotion as well. So sort of pilgrims visiting as well, and so that's just a nice evening shot to end with as well, to sort of show this all the way through. So thinking about how this sort of affects undergraduate research. Obviously we've heard a lot of examples this weekend about how original fieldwork experiences and going out there, and this is kind of questioning, making us think, especially with the visual stuff that we've seen. What are we, using to record? A friend of mine was doing a project in the States using her iPhone to record something as well. So there's all kinds of exciting opportunities available with new technologies. But then how do we archive that, and how do we present it together? Are we limited by having written dissertations, for example, as well? Would it be better if we could create a CD-ROM and stuff? So all those sort of things. But also, how do you incorporate the personal into the academic, and sort of delineate those two things together, and that as well. So just to summarise, recording, looking at old and new tools, how they materialise the knowledge you're trying to convey, and a thick description of how much is needed or how little, to create that sort of Gert's ideal, but also archiving as a selective process, and making it as accessible as possible. And then issues of representation, but also, presenting the final product as a creative process of editing, and that's kind of distinct, the division between aesthetics and reality, and is that really there? Should we favour hierarchically one over the other, and as well. And then finally, interdisciplinary, that's what this weekend's all been about, really. Thinking about cooperating with previous researchers, but also revisiting, remaking, and evaluating that process. So I hope that was okay, and thank you very much.